All right, so third and last talk of this session is about OpenID Connect certification. Why you would do it, what's useful, how you would do it. So my name is Zandbelt. I'm the author of two relying party implementations of OpenID Connect. And as such, I ran into the issue of making sure that whatever the spec says is actually executed in your implementation. How would you know? I mean, you read the spec, you actually go out and develop your stuff, and you hope you're correct, and you'll find out in a year from now once it gets deployed. Well, you can do better, right? And that's what the OpenID Connect certification program is for. So first, a little bit of history. February 2014, OpenID Connect was standardized, and then in April 2015, the certification program was launched, and I'll tell you in a moment why that was done. December 2016, RP self-certification started to be a pilot program, and then last April, the OpenID Foundation added resources and funding to further develop the program, to make it scale better, to make it deal with more testers and tests, etc. And then at this point in time, we have 42 listed certified OPs and 12 RPs where the program is in pilot. And actually 10 minutes ago, we received an email with a new application for certification, so that's 13. So first, why? Why would you go and do certification? So the purpose of the OpenID Foundation itself is to drive adoption of OpenID Connect and to stimulate the wider ecosystem, right? That's a clear goal. The OpenID Connect was developed as a standard, and of course the OpenID Connect standard itself is something that needs to be adopted over time, and how would you stimulate that? Certification is one of these, the tools to do that. Secondly, of course, it's all about interoperability, right? So rather than finding out, like I said, in a year from now that your implementation is not interoperable with another guy's implementation, you could find out ahead of time by testing against a reference implementation, if you will, whether you were doing okay. And that is relevant for participants that actually develop libraries or deploy OpenID Connect code. And is also important for the market itself, right? To be able to prove that there is interoperability, which, for example, SAML failed to do, which has hindered a lot of the adoption in the early days of SAML. And then the third reason why you do this is of course, conformance in an interoperable way, but also in a security way, right? And that is important for customers, right? Customers that actually deploy OpenID Connect. How can you make sure that you're dealing with a relatively well-designed and interoperable and secure implementation? So important for buyers, but also for the vendors for themselves to market their implementation in such a way. And last but not least, and that's really the reason why I got into this as well, is testing per se, right? I mean, end-to-end testing of your OpenID Connect implementation or deployment is important, and writing your own code to do that is good, but you'll be testing against your own brain, right, which is not very good. So for developers, but also for deployers of OpenID Connect, it is crucial, and this is really the reason why I got into it, apart from all of the other reasons for people that might have interest in this program. So the resources, so what does it consist of, the certification program? So there is a bunch of code that was developed, that is the certification test suite. That code was mainly driven by Roland Hedberg for many years, I would say, and he did a great job of getting the first suite into place that would allow people to test against. And then we have infrastructure that runs that code. So there's a server called the OP test server running at op.certification.openid.net, and that is a server that is able to test your OpenID Connect implementation. There's an RP test suite as well. So if you're a developer or a deployer of an OpenID Connect relying party, you can actually test against the RP certification.openid.net server to make sure that your RP is doing the right thing. And there's a team of people that actually takes care of maintaining this infrastructure, helping the testers, and making sure that things are working out. So what are we doing? So as a team, we developed the OP test suite, and what it does is actually it simulates an RP, right? So this RP will actually start firing off requests to your OpenID Connect provider, and it expects a certain response back to it, and it will see if that response is the right response. This is how you pass a particular test. And so that test tool simulates an RP. It runs on its own port with its own callback URI and such, and it generates requests, parses responses, and writes log files about the result. The RP test suite is kind of similar, right? But the other way around. So the test tool simulates an OP in this case. It is the provider, and you as an RP will have to send requests to it to say, okay, log that user in for me. And you will have to consume the responses and make sure that you do the right thing with those responses, which is quite different from the OP testing if you see that. So you will also write logs about the results. That is basically what you do to go through all of these tests. Now, the users or the testers themselves, typically the audience is developers, right? If you have a library that you're developing, or you have an OpenID Connect provider or relying party that you're developing, you can test against this to make sure that it at least conforms to some basic standards. But also, you could be deploying an OpenID Connect provider or relying party, and in that case, you probably want to configure it in a certain way. You don't want it to do everything that the library or the tool can do. You want to lock it down in a certain way or deploy it in a certain way with certain key materials. So it's sort of a profile, deployment profile that you're going to create, and you can actually use that instance to test against the OpenID Connect test suite again, right? So that's useful for both developers as well as, I would say, customers of that library or tool. So how is it actually done, certification? You run a series of tests like I've described there, and these are request-response interactions between your client, your library, your tool, and the test suite. The results, as I said, are logged on both sides, and a result can be a positive test, like, okay, this signature validates on that token, or it can be a negative test, right? So if the tool, for example, signs an ID token that it sends to your relying party with the wrong key, you should reject that token. That's a negative test, and you should record that you are refusing to accept that token to pass the test. So now it's live demo time. Of course, we had one successful demo already today, so this one will probably be a bit difficult, but I'm going to try anyway. First, I got to find my mouse. Yep. So what I'm doing is I'm firing up a Docker container with the test suite in there. So it's running locally now. The whole test suite, the RP test suite, the OP test suite, and a sample OP, it's all running locally in a Docker environment. So you can see that this is the way that you would typically develop your code as well, right? You don't have to go to the official certification all the time, the official certification server. You can run it locally in your own Docker container. And then you actually start going out to that test suite and run your tests. So, oops, sorry. So this is what you will see on the official live certification server as well, but it's running locally now. You can actually go out and register a new provider that you want to test, your local provider that's running locally. And there's one running already that I will go to, and I will actually start that instance. And then I go to that instance, and here you can see the series of tests that will be fired off to your OpenID Connect provider. And those are all tests with a particular ID that somewhat describes what that test is doing, a description with a more detailed description of how your implementation should behave, and you can actually run through that by clicking this button, and it will actually go out. You will log in to your OpenID Connect provider, it will send a response back to the test suite, and the test suite says, okay, this is a response that looks fine, right? So you can go through all of that. And now, of course, if you're a developer like Philip Skokan is, you do this a lot of times and you get pain in your wrist and you think, well, there must be something else that I can do here. So he actually went out and automated all of that by just steering a browser to actually do the click work for him instead of running through it manually all the time. And then you can actually integrate it into your continuous test environment of your library to make sure that with every commit that you do, it's still conforming to the specification, right? So he actually, tricky part of the demo, of course, he actually made this, right? It all executes the tests for you. And this is something that people who are developers of libraries and tools should really take a look at. This is the way that you can automate it and integrate it into your environment together with the local running testing instance. This is the way how you can develop, and once you release your code, you certify against the official certification server, right? So it's a pretty cool development that was pretty recent. I think that's a successful demo, right? Okay. So we continue. So as I said, you run through all of these tests and you produce logs. Logs are recorded on the server side, on the certification server side, that keeps a record of everything that has been executed against it. And you have to produce logs on your client side, on your provider or relying party side. And both of those, and those logs may also be screenshots, right, that show, okay, this token was rejected, for example. You will bundle up the logs and you will sign them together with a signed statement that you actually went through the test and that you're the developer of this library and you want to get certified. You'll send it to certification@openid.net, and some people like Mike Jones will actually pick it up and check that all the bits and pieces are in place, and then you will get listed on the OpenID Connect certification website, as Mike Jones showed you just now. Now, I still have to emphasize that this is self-certification, right? So it's not Mike Jones or Don or me going through your code or your results and saying, oh, wait, this looks good. It's just to make sure that all the pieces are in place to have a proper self-assertion statement recorded on the website, right? It's not about the OpenID Foundation putting a stamp on your implementation. It is just a public statement that you can make. I ran through all of these tests at this point in time, and they all succeeded, and this is why my implementation is probably a good implementation, right? So what are the recent developments? I mean, this work has been going on for many years, driven mainly by Mike Jones and Roland Hedberg. In the recent months, we've been busy kind of stabilizing the environment a bit, making it a GitHub project with an issues tracker where people can go to and actually report problems that they have, making sure that there's a continuous integration environment for the test suite itself, so testing the test suite, and Dockerize it, right, so that you can actually spin up an RP or OP test suite inside of your development environment and run tests against that. We've changed the web graphical user interface a bit to bring it up to speed, and we've injected some processes, some more people and funding to it, right, to help and develop the infrastructure and also help the testers. As we see this coming because we see other profiles of OpenID Connect under development, and some of these profiles are probably interested to actually build out certification for their own profiles, right, and build that out on top of the existing certification suite. So that's what we're looking into today. There are additional features in the OpenID Connect specifications that are under development, and it will be standardized that we need to include in there, like logout and session management. There's the profiles that Mike mentioned, like Moderna and FAPI, that are probably interested in getting their own test suite, their own tests in addition to the existing ones. And there's, for example, an organization that deals with real estate instances that is interested in building out their own program to make sure that all of their participants in that ecosystem actually run implementations and deployments that match the standard. So I think I'm almost through already. So there's the team that runs this program is built out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now 7 people together with Philippe. We do the code development, we maintain the running infrastructure, and we help out people if they have any questions about this. You can also reach out to certification at OpenID Connect, openid.net if you want to get started with this, or if you want to submit your certification. application. And if there are any topics that you want to discuss with respect to the code, you can actually put them into the GitHub issues tracker. So that's everything I wanted to present over here. If you want to get a more detailed demo of what I was just showing there, you can actually come over to me and I'll go into the depth with you on that. But for now, that's it. Thank you.
Hans, if you'd take a seat, and Nov and Mike, if you'd come up and we'll have a panel discussion. While the guys are getting set, I just wanted to introduce myself. Sorry I was late. I'm Don Tebow, the Executive Director of the OpenID Foundation. We'll get to questions in just a second, as soon as the guys are up. In Alex's Simon's presentation, he talked about the importance of standards and did a shout out for OpenID Connect. This is an opportunity for you to participate in building on top of OpenID Connect. As Mike indicated, whether it's health or real estate, et cetera, participating in these work groups gives you two things. One, early awareness of what's coming, of how OpenID Connect and certification might impact your organization and your industry. The second, most important, is early influence on how that standard, that certification, and those profiles are rolled out. So early awareness and early influence on OpenID Connect as it's being built out for each of these use cases and industries is an important part of how this community effort goes underway. So with that being said, questions, comments?
Thanks, guys. So if I'm a company that uses a vendor tool like Ping Federate, for example, to do my OP for me, I'm not developing it myself, and if that company like Ping Federate has already achieved certification, by the commutative property then, does my company get certificate? Can I like say I'm certified, or would I go through that certification process again with Ping Federate, you know, as my tool? Like, how does that work if you're using a vendor tool to get certified?
That's a great question. There's actually a specific provision for that in the certification program. But as all of you who are developers or deployers know, it's actually only when you deploy the software and configure it and put it into production that A, it works at all, and B, that you will have made choices or not that conform to the specification. And there may be ways to configure Ping Federate such that you wouldn't be conformant. So the short answer is, if your company wants to get certified, you have to go through the tests yourselves. It's easy. What we do in the program is we cut the price in half if you're certifying a new deployment of software that's already deployed.
And Mike, it might be sensible to just give a sense of what those costs are and the pricing for certification?
Sure. For members, it's very cheap. It's $200 to do as many profiles as you can certify within a calendar year. You can join as an individual member for $25. So even starting from ground zero, you could do the whole thing for $225, which doesn't cover our costs, but does provide an incentive for people to participate, furthering our mission for interoperability. If you decide not to join the OpenID Foundation, it's still a cheap price, which is $999. I say that it's cheap because other similar certification programs or related certification programs in the past have charged large five-figure sums to have third parties do the testing of your software, where because it's self-certification, our costs are largely paying for Roland and Hans to keep things working, to move it forward, and to answer questions.
My question is there anything in the OpenID specification that would support a relying party performing user assurance?
Define user assurance.
Metadata from the OP that would help the relying party determine with the, to a certain level that the user is who he claims to be.
Indirectly. There is support in the OpenID specification for what are called aggregated and distributed claims, which is a fancy way of saying some of your claims can be signed by third parties. And they can either be fetched remotely or they can be bundled into the token. So that, for instance, I might get a signed assertion from a professional association that I have a particular accreditation, and then I could move that signed assertion as a claim through OpenID Connect. So profiles would have to define particular validated claims, but we intentionally put syntax in the claims representation to enable those use cases. I'll take a moment while others are thinking of questions to remark that it's actually apropos in my mind that of the three panelists, all three of us are from different continents. That actually reflects the reality of how OpenID Connect has been developed and indeed the global reach of the work.
Other questions or?
There's one in front.
No.
So similar to that other person back there that said that he's a PingFederate customer, we also use PingFederate. All of our applications are built in-house though, and they all consume headers. They don't consume claims. Do you guys have any experience with coaching organizations on moving forward into the future, or have any input on how we can go about trying to pitch the benefit of receiving OIDC claims as opposed to having us convert those to headers?
I'll leave this to the developers.
Well, it's not just a developer, but a former Ping guy, right? So, so yeah, I mean, okay, put on Ping hat. Ping actually has infrastructure that would allow you to do that, right? There's tools like Ping Access that are exactly meant for that use case that you put in front of your legacy application consuming headers, and they'll actually bring you into the OpenID Connect world by using, in fact, OpenID Connect to SSO people via Ping Access through PingFederate back into Ping Access, consuming the claims and setting the headers that your application still understands. So that's one way of doing it, right? And having to natively convert your applications to OpenID Connect is not always necessary, right? In fact, I would say it's a pattern to actually externalize the authentication and the authorization pieces into dedicated components that are able to deal with standardized protocols and can convert into legacy worlds, right? And that's a good example of that is something like Ping Access. Okay, now Ping hat F, drop the Ping hat. And Ping is not the only vendor doing that, I would say. So yeah, you have options there. It's not doing OpenID Connect natively into your app is certainly an option because of the simplicity of the relying party side of things. But there are plenty of ways that you can go around to actually make your application OpenID Connect aware. Yeah.
Now, do you want to talk about, for instance, Yahoo Japan's recent decision?
They wanted to confirm their implementation is following final spec, and so to updating their implementation, they use certification, and this is Yahoo's view. And from open source library developer, I'm a OpenID Connect Ruby library developer, and using certification, I'm using RP certification for my sample IDPs test. So this is very easy to integrate and doing CI tests also. This is very useful.
Yeah, right. So I'm the developer of an Apache module in C for OpenID Connect, and being able to run that through these certification tests is also immensely useful, trying to squash the bugs there. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up on my point. So all of the fine-grain authorization rules are being done on our application side. So part of the goal with converting the applications off of headers and onto OIDC standards would be to just actually get ping access out of the flow, because it doesn't necessarily need to be there. We just do really broad grain access control there, and it seems like an unnecessary step, and to try to simplify the architecture, that's the overall goal.
Yeah, that's getting into a ping discussion now, I think, but ping access and ping federate itself are more geared towards centralized enterprise control, right? Where you actually want to centralize all of your authorization rules and then have policy enforcement endpoints executing those policies, and integrate your legacy into the OpenID Connect world. If you don't have those requirements, yeah, then it might be, you might have other options indeed. But yeah, I mean, we're getting into a product discussion now, I think, so.
I didn't catch all of the configuration for the Docker container that you spun up, but I imagine you had to point that or configure that to the code you're testing against. But is that something that can also be done in a manner that can be easily integrated for CI? So for automated testing, essentially.
Yes. So the configuration itself. In my continuous integration test, I've done that manually, right? You do that once, and then you run against that instance that you can spin up over and over again. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure if you can also completely automate the creation of that configuration already. I don't think so, to be honest. But that is something you could actually bring up on the GitHub issues tracker, or send out on the email list, and we can take a look at that. Yeah, that's certainly something we would consider. Yeah.
Another resource that you might consider when we were talking about certification, self-certification is very new. We innovated it at the OpenID Foundation. We're finding a number of different instances of self-certification being used as part of larger trust frameworks. You can go to the OpenID Foundation website and see a blog that talks about how the Real Estate Standards Organization work through not only their own self-certification of their OpenID Connect implementations, but how they integrated that certification into a larger certification suite for real estate agents and agencies here in the US. So it may be that is appropriate to the kind of work that you're doing in your industry or your market niche. So both the certification itself is new, as well as some of these new profiles. And again, it's a great time and opportunity for you to participate in it, kind of extending this work into the areas that you know best. Any other questions or comments for the good of you?
So self-certification is a really good start, but what role do you think there could be for third-party certifications?
We're going to be developing a white paper that talks about the advantages and disadvantages of self-certification and traditional third-party certification. We are not making a claim that self-certification replaces traditional auditing or third-party certification. We see it as complementary to a set of trust tools that you'll be architecting along with the code itself. Again, early days, we invite your participation. What's been great about the work that these gentlemen have done is that it's spawned new work in the real estate world and in other application areas.
In fact, I was going to say that the Real Estate Standards Organization is using our self-certification suite as part of their third-party certification of real estate software implementations. So, you know, mix and match. It just depends both upon convenience to the developer and the perceived value of the different business processes. And at this point, it just becomes a business decision. The OpenID Foundation decided that we would enable self-certification in partly because then anybody could do it at any time, and you didn't have to spin up a purchase order for enough money to pay a third-party company to do this. You could just run it yourself, and it's nonetheless trustworthy because you're putting your results out for public inspection, as well as signing a legal document saying, I really ran these and they really passed.
Yeah, I need to come back to the question of the gentleman over there about automated configuration. So, and it actually is a good example of one of the features of OpenID Connect. So I have to correct myself on the RP side. If you want to test an RP, you can actually go ahead without explicit manual registration because you use the dynamic client registration features of OpenID Connect to register your client with the test suite and get going, right? So that is completely automatable already. Yeah.
So a couple of closing notes, unless somebody has a question. You'll have other opportunities to do a deep dive into some of these working group activities, whether it's HEART or the Financial API Protocol tomorrow in the context of the Cloud Identity Summit. And then for those of you that are in the US and particularly in the Bay Area, OpenID Foundation offers a regular set of workshops where each of the work groups talks in a day-long format about the progress of the work group, the issues that they're encountering, and that's an open invitation for both members and non-members alike to really understand the plumbing of each of these profile efforts. The next one, as we traditionally do, is the Monday before the Internet Identity Workshop. What happens in those workshops is that different companies take turns hosting that workshop. The next one in October will be hosted by PayPal, and it's also a chance for you to see some of the identity teams that are working on these programs from all over the world. So again, that's the Monday before the next IIW. Also tomorrow you'll have another chance to learn more about some of the very exciting work being done in the Financial API Working Group with banks, as well as HEART and other work groups. Any other questions or comments? Again, thanks for your time and attention. We encourage you to join the foundation, either the organization that you work for or individuals. This is a community effort, and each time we do a certification, it makes it easier for the next group, the next developer, to better understand the breadth and depth of what OpenID Connect is bringing to the community. Thanks again. How about one last round of applause for these guys up? Thank you.